Welcome to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. In this episode, Pat and James talk with author Richard Kelly Kemick. We start off with a softball question, pen or pencil, but then move into more serious turf, such as Richard's writing and publishing process, which includes no small amount of rejections, as we are all used to. The pleasure of working with a fabulous old-school editor, moving up the rejection ladder. Can an arts community become too dependent on grants? And relatedly, can funding abundance disconnect the artist from their audience? From there, we move into our favorite authors. The writer should work harder than the reader. When applying for a grant, have an idea, not an emotion. Rejection is just another step forward. Richard's top 5 grant pitch tips. How being creative forces you out of yourself. And of course, there is no better life than the creative life.
Hey, James.
Yo, Pat.
Guess who's in the Gifted Underachievers Clubhouse? Guess who's in the Gifted Underachievers Clubhouse today?
I know, we're messing this up already. Well, you know, we're overflowing with gifted achievers, I think, right now.
It's crazy and it's great. And so today we have Richard Kelly Kemick. Is that how you pronounce your last name, Richard?
Yeah, you're bang on. You're bang on.
Oh my gosh, what are the odds? I guess the only other option would be Kemick, and Kemick sounded more normal. Yeah, so thanks for being with us, Richard. And Richard is a writer. I'm just going to read Richard's bio. Okay, James?
Yeah, sounds good.
Richard Kelly Kemick is an award-winning poet, journalist, and fiction writer. His debut collection of short stories, Hello Horse, was published August 2024 by Biblioasis. And I'm holding it up right now. We're audio only, so...
Awesome cover.
Yeah, I love the cover. He is also the author of I Am Herod, available on audiobook, the poetry collection Caribou Run, and the stage play Amor de Cosmos, a delusional musical. I love it when the word delusional is in anything.
Yeah, we're big fans of the word delusional.
Richard's limited series podcast, Natural Life, is an intimate and unexpectedly honest documentary on his cousin who is serving a life sentence without parole in Michigan. So, thanks for being here, Richard.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me, Pat and James. It's very nice to meet the two of you.
Yeah.
So Pat probably has something to bring up, but I was reading this interview of you, Richard, and I got to say it's really funny because the first question, the guy runs on it feels a little long for a question, but he ends it with a space straddling the northern half of Alaska-Yukon border. If so or not, how did that influence and shape the book? And your first line is, "I'm a fraud." So, so immediately we're like, okay, there's some humor here that we work with. And then this person asks another long question, and you respond, "Christ alive, these are difficult questions. Whatever happened to you write with a pen or a pencil?" So I'm going to start. We're going to go easy at the beginning here. Pen or pencil?
Pen, always a pen. Though I have been told that my notebook gives "quote unquote" off-putting and serial killer vibes. So I keep that closed door. But always a pen. Always a pen.
And
that's
what
hilarious.
kind of pen? Ballpoint, black ink, blue ink?
I have black, blue, and red, and then I use a fountain pen. And I really love that just because I'm kind of a sentimentalist. So the pens I've had, they're not fancy. They're just Lamy Safari pens, but I've had them for a while now. And it's nice to kind of go through ink and feel some just modicum of accomplishment.
Well, yeah, you get a little bit of on your fingers, because
Yeah. Well, and it's not just little black marks on a screen that disappear, and then you're like, where'd I put that thing? If you have serial killer vibe on your notebook, is it blood spattered? What's
No, it's just I don't even know where it happened or how it came about, but I just have this thing about wasting paper. So the notebook is just like everything is covered, like all the margins, everything is written in.
Oh yeah.
And because it's with a fountain pen, it's often like these like really like theatrical flourishes that like go between lines. And anyways,
I see what you mean. Yeah.
I was about to say, we did have an interviewee who's a carcass specialist, so maybe we could interview two of you, but
Look those, yeah. Well, and I'm getting this image. I think I don't know if it was Seven or Lucky Number Seven, one of those serial killer movies, and they go into the guy's apartment, and it's all like super big dark rooms, and then this notebook with teeny tiny printing all over every single page, and it's like, okay, and now I know what whoever said that to you meant.
yeah. In my defense, I feel like the content of the writing absolves me of any serial killer accusation because it's all just like little stories about Canada. So I feel like any judge would surely see it from my perspective.
yeah, one would hope. One would hope.
Despite the trail of dead bodies out the back. Well, yeah, that's awesome. It kind of reminds me of your book, which I don't know why I keep holding it up. It's like To Prove I Have It, which I thought, and by book I mean Hello Horse, the story collection that came out in 2024, which we'll link to. And I did find this kind of starkness to the tales, and not claustrophobic, but people were feeling trapped in their lives and unable to communicate in many of them. Just how my vibe, like that's how I perceived it as a reader. And but there's comedy too. It's comic. That story about the teachers down in Mexico for a convention, I laughed out loud because
Oh, thanks.
it's so much like conventions. I used to work in the conference industry, and yeah, some of
Sure.
the breakout rooms were empty. There'd be like one person in them, and the poor, it'd be like going to a reading at Chapters or Warehouse or something, and and your mom's the only one there. It's like, so I just found a really nice, rich kind of texture to all the stories. There is for sure darkness, but there's also this sense of people kind of uh counting on each other, even in can be very weird, strange ways, which feels a lot like life. And so, as a reader, I'm very happy with these stories. Can you talk a little bit about how you got it published? And because you mentioned earlier, before
Sure.
we started talking, that it was about a 10-year writing process. A lot of them were published first in
Yeah.
literary mags. So,
Sure. Yeah, absolutely, Pat. Thank you for the kind words about the book. It's really nice of you. Um, the path to publication for this one was, yeah, about 10 years ago. I guess even more now, maybe 12 or something like that. I started putting together a collection of short stories, and all the short stories were linked,
mm,
or all the stories in that collection were linked. And then I was feeling great about that and submitted it, and it was rejected. And then I then scrapped that idea entirely and then wrote a new collection about animal stories. Was feeling great about that. That was rejected. And then I scrapped that entirely and then wrote like a non-themed collection, I guess you'd
yeah.
say. So without a gimmick. Feeling great about that. That was rejected. And so this takes the vast majority of that 10 years. Um, and then I just got really lucky. A lot of those stories in those failed manuscripts were or sorry, not a lot of them, some of them were picked up by magazines and journals along the way.
Mhm.
And then after the third manuscript's failure, uh, one story was in a magazine and happened to be read by the editor John Metcalf,
Mm.
who's with Biblioasis. And John contacted me and said, "Do you have a collection you would like to submit
Woo!
to the press that he's with?"
Yeah.
And actually, I don't think John has since become a very good friend of mine. Like I sent him Christmas cards and pictures of the kid, but I don't think him and I have actually talked about this. That I sent him a manuscript years before he
Oh.
contacted me, and he never got back to me. And it was one of those failed manuscripts that I sent somewhere else eventually, and then it was turned down and so forth. So when he originally contacted me, I thought it was in reference to the manuscript I had submitted like 6 years earlier that he was only like finally getting to now. But it was not. And so when he asked if I had a manuscript, I then went through these failed manuscripts and took what I thought were the strongest stories in each one, and then kind of stitched them together into this
Ah,
manuscript. So
Fantastic.
yeah,
I like
yeah,
that. I like that a lot, because, one of the things about being a writer is it takes time, right? So here you get this opportunity, right? The editor calls up, say, do you have a manuscript or a collection? And it's not, oh shit, I've got to now spend a year writing a book. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I've got, this back catalog that has, some of it's been published in literary journals and that kind of stuff, and you feel good about it. And so let's see how we can package this. I mean,
yeah.
and did you just say here it is, or did he help you pick stories, or how did that play out?
Um, yeah, there were, yeah, that's a great question, James. Went, we went back and forth on the edits of individual stories a bit.
Mhm.
Also, John, I should say, is like, I don't want to say 1,000 years old, but he's got to be over 900 years old. And he doesn't use a computer. And so everything that we
Better.
do is through the post, and then we'll talk on the phone. Uh,
Wow.
and yeah, yeah, it was, it was wonderful. It was really wonderful. Anyways, so we kind of go back and forth with edits of individual stories, and I would have to look again, but I think there were maybe a couple stories that I submitted as part of the original manuscript, if you will, that I think were eventually cut. Um, yeah. Oh, and then he also wanted me to write one more story.
Mm.
Um, so that was kind of nice, and working on him with the story from scratch, where all the other stories had been edited previously by magazine editors and so forth
Yeah.
as
Mhm.
well. So that was
Mhm.
really nice.
Can you tell me
Um,
which story he asked you to write?
yeah, actually, Pat, the one you mentioned a second ago about the teachers' conference.
Oh, no kidding. Why did he
Yeah.
want that one? Did he
Yeah.
say?
Well, so he just wanted. Yeah, he felt the collection was short. One
Hmm.
story. He just wanted one
Really?
story more, and
And
uh,
did
yeah,
he
I've
say?
been. Oh, sorry, James. Sorry.
No, well, I was just curious if there was a content reason as well. Like, you've he felt like we need something that ties everything together, and so we need another story, or was it really just we need to expand this?
Yeah, I think the latter. Yeah, and I think that because he certainly did not give me any directive as to what he wanted the story about or tone or anything at all,
Mhm.
aside from the fact that he wanted one more story. And I'd been kind of kicking around this idea of setting a story at a teachers conference for uh, years. Um, and then so he asked for one, and I thought, like, you know what, I know exactly what it could be.
Yeah.
And working with John, I mean, it has been wonderful that he's edited, like he's worked with like Alice Munro and like huge names. So
Wow.
I thought it was also a real opportunity for me to have him come in to a story at the ground level, where all the
Mm.
other stories, as I had mentioned, had kind of been worked previously by editors. Um, yeah, and so I was able to learn a lot from him in that way, and it was a real opportunity.
Yeah, that's so great.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the dream, right? As a writer, especially a short story writer, because I write short stories too when I'm not
Yeah.
working with clients and stuff. And that idea that, you're going to send a short story out and you never know what's going to happen the second it, goes. But, it gets published, somebody sees it, appreciates it, gets in touch and says, "Hey," and then you get to work with this person to kind of develop what you're doing and improve. And and you mentioned that he worked with you a lot on the editing. Do you feel like you became a better writer working with him and maybe
Yeah, absolutely, Jay. Without question or qualification, those earlier manuscripts that I mentioned a little while ago that were rejected. I should also say they deserved to be rejected. In hindsight, the editors of those publishers that turned them down were absolutely right. Yeah, and I feel like I've not come to that realization, but really, I don't know, accepted that in working with John, in kind of seeing a story through his eyes and what works and what doesn't. And he's also turned me on to a lot of writers to read to help me as well. And so sometimes I hear of writers who kind of complain about working with an editor. And I feel I've just been with the 3 books I've had, each one I've just been so fortunate that the editor has always, without qualification or exception, not just made the book better, but also made me better as a writer, which I then take those skills into further or future projects as well.
Yeah, that is the dream, isn't it? I mean, I always wanted
Yeah,
to work with an editor because I don't really write short stories, I write novels, but
sure.
my dream for I had one, get quite far up the rejection ladder at
Sure.
Penguin Imprint, and then my only dream really was to finally I would get somebody to help me with the damn book because it was flawed. I knew that, but I couldn't fix it myself. So, but that doesn't happen at the Big Five anymore, as far as I know. It's the days
Yeah,
of Thomas Wolfe and I
yeah,
forget.
Perkins. Yeah, the Perkins
Yeah,
Wolf.
Perkins, yeah, they're gone. I
yeah,
can't bring a story in a red wagon, and and get an editor to read it and go, okay, no, this, no, no, here's an idea, So that's
right.
really great that you can do that with still in this day and age with the
Yeah,
shorter form.
Pat, I completely agree with you of how rare of an opportunity it was and is. Um, yeah, and I absolutely agree with you too about how, in some ways, I feel like a book, like as you talk about with the Big Five, it's not common to be assigned an editor so much anymore as like maybe like a copy editor and a proofreader.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that it's almost in my sorry, not holy, humble opinion, humble.
Holy humbleness.
um, uh, um, I had a friend who's does public relations, and a few years ago, before I was doing interviews, she's like one of my best friends. I've known her forever, and she was giving me tips, and she said, "Richard, you should also know you come off as quite arrogant all the time."
No
And
way.
so anyways, and now I know that she's going to hear me referring to my opinion as holy.
Well,
Yeah,
we might.
well, like Jesus, I am humble too. So
You don't come just to whatever your friend's coaching did, it totally worked because I've met
Well,
arrogant
that's
people. You're not one of them, so.
that's very nice of you. It's very nice of you. It's very nice of you.
Anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah,
You were
but
getting
I
your
do
holy opinion.
completely agree with you that without an editor, I, I don't know. It's almost like a book can't realize, in my opinion, it's the fullest version of
Yeah.
itself. That you'd never have like a video, like a movie that was unedited.
Oh, that's right.
right.
Um, yeah, and so I feel really fortunate to have had this
Yeah.
experience
And
especially because of how rare it is. Sorry, James.
Yeah.
no. And I was just gonna say that, and I think this is true for all artistic domains, right?
Mm,
Which is that, and maybe in the past it was easier to find somebody to create that relationship with. And obviously
Mm.
there's the wolf, the sort of the idealized and depicted in Hollywood relationship between editor and writer and that kind of thing. But, perhaps it was easier for a writer who's trying to figure themselves out, and not just the young writer, but any writer, running into that editor who can nurture their talent and kind of guide them. And since the Big Five isn't doing that so much anymore, were very, I think, fortunate, and obviously he read something in you that he really appreciated and wanted to develop, which is great.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm wondering if people now have to fall more into the paid category, right? Which,
Mm.
is what Pat and I really do a lot of. Um, but coming up with the money and finding someone that you trust and believe in and that kind of thing, as opposed to this more organic process.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. James, it's something and I think Pat and I chatted about this a bit before, is that there are also grants for editors, or like for grants for writers to pay editors. That I have no idea what's going on in the States, both grant wise or really in any way anymore. But I with Canada, there's it's they're, I don't want to say common, but they're certainly available, grants for writers to not keep themselves, but just to pay an editor with.
Mhm.
And I think this is in response largely to what you two have said about the dearth of editors in
Mhm.
most publishing houses now.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a way of democratizing access, to, refine your art. And it's probably, for artists and actors and, all kinds of people. And it's interesting that when I talk to Canadians or people in UK, Europe, they often will say, well, there's this program or this opportunity, or there's this way that we support each other that doesn't happen as much, or I haven't. And
Oh,
so it seems to really be, a great way to develop some ideas. Like, what can we do better here in the U.S. in terms of nurturing art, nurturing writers, and that kind of thing?
yeah. But also now it's unlikely to happen in the US unless there's a pretty big change.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's a whole
A whole nother kettle of
Sure.
fish.
other conversation. But I mean, the larger point in the U.S. we don't, everything seems to be more transactional.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's necessarily completely true, but I love this process that you're talking about. And just as a creative person in general, to have that kind of person with experience and perspective, and to do that collaboration, sounds really great.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And just out of curiosity, so because the way you worked with John Metcalf is, did I get that name right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, is that he saw your story and then got in touch with you, and you had already subbed to him, and he's with Biblioasis. I'm
Mhm.
curious, where did he see your story? Did he say? Well, you would
Yeah,
know.
in the Fiddlehead,
Oh, in the Philhead, so
which
it's
is
a
actually quite close to New Hampshire. Yeah, just up in New
Yeah.
Brunswick.
well
Hopefully you've been
respected.
rejected by them. Thank you.
You're not alone. Yeah,
Oh,
so well-respected literary mag, and I think the scene is a little different in Canada, and I'm talking through my hat, but I have been, aware of local publishers just because Anvil
Yeah.
Press in Vancouver, who also publishes Subterrane,
Mhm.
where I think you've been published, I'm pretty sure. Um, I had a little more, insight into how they operate, and it's sort of more supported by the government. It does, in a way, uh, make it easier for people to submit their stories because it's not a commercial, not necessarily 100% commercial enterprise. They publish literary fiction in their mags 99.9% of the time, and poetry and stuff like that. And so, does the average reader, I like Ellery Queen's mystery magazine because I'll read
Mhm.
anything, but sometimes those kinds of publications have to be supported either by through government grants, which in Canada seems to be the case, or through MFA programs, which in the States seems to
Sure.
be more common, and also in Canada, like Prism. Um,
Sure.
so it is kind of a thing where if you write that type of fiction, you have you have a place to send your stuff.
Mhm.
If you write pot boilers, you still have a place to send your stuff, but um it's not as it doesn't seem as obvious. I'm not sure why I think that. Maybe because I look at
Sure.
lists from, poets and writers and they're like, "Oh, calls for submissions are open." They don't mention, you know, the lowbrow mags.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I certainly see what you're saying. Sometimes I think, um, yeah, Pat, I'm under the same understanding that magazines like Subtrain, Fiddlehead, I can't think of a single one that wouldn't be not just supported by Canada Council, but heavily supported by Canada Council, and then oftentimes a university as well, which of course is supported by the federal government. Um, yeah, and then James, to your point a second ago about how different that is, how stark of a difference that is between Canada and the States,
Mhm.
and this access to funding. Don't get me wrong, I've benefited. I've been very fortunate in grants to support my life. Sometimes I do think that at some point when an arts community becomes too dependent on grants, such as the literary community in Canada,
Mhm.
it's it's hard not to see, or at least believe, in a decrease in quality because of it. Or rather, maybe not a decrease in quality, but an estrangement from the between the writer and the reader.
Mhm.
Because the reader, in kind of many ways, or at least some ways, is immaterial in a way when
Yeah.
you're
Right.
dependent on a grant instead of readers. And I think that might be why, or at least one of the reasons why, that America produces better writers on average and better magazines as well, I would say. But I don't know.
I
Sometimes
don't
I say this
know.
to my writer friends and it goes over very poorly.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, we treat people worse. So,
Yeah.
we've got more anger and angst and depression perhaps. I don't, it's hard to say. I don't know. I mean, I see the argument that you're making, which is that when you disconnect financing from an audience
Yeah,
and you disconnect the art from its audience, and so it kind of goes into its own little sphere and it almost goes into a bubble, right? And
sure.
and I've seen that like with music a lot, right? So
Mhm.
jazz came from a sort of an urban African American background where it was incredibly improvisational, experimental. It was about growth. It was about being in a room with other people, creating in the moment where the audience is part of the shared creative experience, right? And somewhere along the line, jazz got captured by academia and
Sure.
it's fossilized. A lot of it, not all of it. There's definitely exceptions, but it's kind of fossilized. Where you go to Berkeley College of Music, which is down in Boston, and they have huge, like you can spend your entire life in Berkeley just learning about jazz, pretty much. But where do you go to have that really energetic live jazz experience
Mm.
where you're part of creating the moment with the band instead of more of a conservatory type environment? And so yeah, how do we support artists without running into that kind of a problem? you know
Sure.
is maybe part of it. And so I don't know what the answer is. I wish there was more support in the US because I see a lot of
Mm.
writers who fall outside of sort of there's the literary journal box, right? And I see a lot of
Yeah.
writers fall outside of that who, a decade, 2 decade, well, probably more like 2, 3 decades ago, would have had a lot more success, I think, getting published, but now, probably really struggle because it's become more narrowed.
Mhm.
And I don't know what the answers are to that, but I really feel what you're saying about that though too.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Poignant.
On one hand, I always feel kind of disingenuous when I criticize a granting system that I'm actively beseeching at all times. Um, yeah, but I was recently a judge for a competition where I was reading short stories from many magazines, all Canadian. Um, and it not in all of them, by no means, not in all of them. I would say in the majority of them, if not vast majority of them, there is what I would qualify as a hostility to the reader. That
Mm,
the idea that, and I think that hostility oftentimes comes up in making the reader do all the intellectual heavy lifting
yeah.
Right.
of not just assembling theme, but just like assembling plot or narrative or what is happening. Um, and I feel like that hostility in many ways is a product of the granting system, that there's no, yeah, there, I don't want to say accountability, but from the writer to the reader, but there's perhaps a lack of relationship.
Mm,
Yeah.
well put.
And when we think about great writing, whatever like our favorite author, favorite book is, I would argue that it's always because the relationship between yourself and the writer, the written material is so strong that that's what makes it your favorite book. For whatever reason that relationship
Mhm.
develops, that's what makes it so good. Um, yeah, and when there is this hostility, or at the very least, just ignoring of the reader, I do think it's a detriment to the final product. My own argument starts to fall apart, however, because I like Canada is so steeped in Canadian literature is so steeped in granting culture that it's impossible to get away from. Even like
Mhm.
even if you don't apply to Canada Council yourself, if you're ever published, you will still benefit from Canada Council because
Yeah.
whomever is publishing you has that.
Right.
Um, I don't really have like a I'm in a kind of a closed system here where I'm saying that alternatives may be better, but I don't really have any firsthand
Yeah.
knowledge of those
Yeah.
alternatives.
Mm,
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. It's very easy to criticize the fishbowl you're in,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
To see where it's, not serving you. And I really appreciate this discussion about, bringing in the reader to
Mhm.
writing, right? And how there can be a hostility and where you have writers, good and bad, who say it's the reader's job to understand me.
Mhm. Right.
And there's a difference here. I want to make sure that we don't get into we need to write just for readers in terms of we need to bend the art to the reader and we need to understand the market and those kinds of things. No, we need to write from our creative selves. But at the same time, we do have to have in mind how are we serving the reader, right? And so
Perfect.
if we're
Yeah.
being obtusely um, you know, dark or what's the right word, difficult for the reader to extract pleasure, enjoyment, understanding, then they're not going to come to us. And then, like you said, all of a sudden these grants are the only way you're going to be able to make it.
Yeah. Yeah. James, I absolutely agree with you. Yeah. Agree that by no means am I saying that an a writer shouldn't or yeah shouldn't expect anything out of the reader. Like for example, my favorite writer, Shakespeare, uh, the one and only, is incredibly expects an incredible amount from the reader at all times. Sometimes smotheringly so. Um, so I'm not saying that the better of a writer means the more passive a reader can be.
no, yeah.
Right. Oh no,
Um,
no.
but I think the sweet spot, or maybe like the equation, uh, is when the writer ought to be, just in my lowly opinion, uh, is when the when the writer is working harder than the reader.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Shakespeare may be an easy example for this as well. That yeah, the reader's doing a tremendous amount of work, or if you're seeing it in person, the audience member is doing a tremendous amount of work, but never more than the playwright.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
That makes sense.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, Shakespeare expects a lot of the reader, but he delivers a lot to the reader. And if you, as a
Yeah.
reader, are willing to put a little bit of effort in, you get a huge amount in return. And it's not I've just understood this abstruse kind of thing. I've discovered something really thoughtful and often humorous,
Yeah.
and often insightful about the human condition that remains true hundreds of years later, you know? Yeah, I mean, it's a great example.
So, favorite writers, let's do a go around the
Yeah.
table. James, what's your do you have a favorite?
Yeah. Oh, great.
Yeah, well, so being a New Englander, I have to say John Irving, which is a dangerous name to bring up in this podcast,
He's in the basement.
because of his residence in a basement somewhere. It's undisclosed. But no, he gets New England and celebrates New England for its warts and all, but he also does it in this very sort of stylized way that just I appreciate. In terms of as a short story writer, first and foremost, Grace Paley. She could say more with one sentence than many people can say with an entire story. In terms of just kind of voice and what I like to write about, this is going to sound so cheesy and cliche, but I really like not all of Updike, but like the book Couples, I think is really, really well done. And then there's some short stories by John Cheever. I think one of them is My Brother, which is I don't know, there's something about it that really kind of speaks to me, and it's not all Cheever, not all Updike, but
Well,
there's
you're
this.
kinda you're spilling over here because I asked you for one name.
I know. Well, I know. Well, there is no one name, right?
I know, I know. It's really hard.
Yeah, it's really, really hard.
Yeah,
So I shouldn't
yeah.
have gone first.
No,
Pat,
no,
maybe
no,
you
no, it's okay, I was just pulling your leg. It's, yeah, Cheever. Interesting that your
Pat,
names are all, Grace Paley, I don't know if she's alive. Cheever's dead.
Yeah, they're all gone.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Updike. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, so a living writer whose name, Ben Shattuck, who we've
Oh my
discussed
god, Ben
previously.
Shattuck. Yeah, I haven't
Uh,
read that book, but it
Another
sounds really
short
good.
story writer.
Right.
Really, really liked his stuff. Just discovered him probably about a month ago. Very,
Yeah,
very.
mm,
yeah, and now you're gonna stalk him as soon as you get around to
Yep. It's I can get off my lazy ass. How
it. You slacker.
about you, Pat? Who's your number?
Well, you might know this. It's Olga. I still don't know how to say her last name. Olga
mm.
Toksar
Oh,
Tokarczuk Tokarczuk,
yeah.
and, she's Polish, and there's this book it's a literary mystery, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, but it's so much it's a lot richer than that. I just reread the first 5 pages and marked them up. I gave it to my little brother when he was here visiting from New Zealand, and he took it away on the plane, but for some reason, I had already scanned those pages and was just like, "How did she do
Mm,
this? How did she make me care so much about this very bizarre," kind of like, strange character,
mm,
just getting out of bed, like, that's page 1, and I was riveted. You couldn't have dragged that book out of my hands for $1,000,000. So, she's my that book, it hooked me deep. There's some books that just hook you, I don't know
yeah.
why, and that was one of them. And then as far as other types of writing go, I'm a bit of a slut, I just don't care who wrote it. What they look like, where I met them. I don't care. I'm a compulsive reader, so I've got probably 30 books out of the library at any given time, and
You're out trolling the back of the
I'm
library, kind of
who's
looking.
new? Who's new in here?
Yeah, yeah. I'm looking romance. I'm looking
I
fantasy. I'm looking.
Romance, I can't do it. I already know how it's gonna end, if it doesn't have a happily ever after, it's not romance. So, Weirdly, the same could be said of mystery, but for some reason, I know they're going to solve it, but I don't care. I still find those interesting. But yeah, there's I do love genre writing. I'm a real sucker for a good story, regardless of who wrote it or where it was published or anything like that. But yeah, do I have favorites? I mean, it's hard. I've been reading a ton of nonfiction, and I've been reading a lot about
Mm,
not just Frankenstein and but sort of outsider women who write, and also the science in the early 1800s, because I love the science shit. And they used to use electricity in gynecology. Like, you would not believe
mhm.
what they did with electricity when they first found out about it. And so I just find it all. I'm reading a ton of nonfiction right now, and it's like reading fiction in a way. I don't understand why I don't feel like it's any more work than fiction. So that didn't really answer the question. I went on at great lengths without an answer, except Olga.
Richard, how about you? So Shakespeare would be your top. Who's two, three?
Yeah, and then maybe Alice Munro would be in there, or
Yeah.
Alice Munro would certainly be in there. And then maybe to round out the podium, I might. Yeah, I guess. I mean, he's so similar to Alice Munro. It kind of feels like a cheat, but maybe Chekhov might be in there.
Ah,
That doesn't feel
Yeah.
cheap. No, that's true. Forgot about Chekhov. Yeah, there's so many
yeah.
good writers.
I know. And as you were talking, I was thinking about there's two books that I tend to keep around so I can give
Mm,
them away because I like them so much.
Ah.
yeah.
And one is The Orchard by Adele Crockett, which it was her daughter who found her diary
Wow.
and published it. And it's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read.
Mm.
And then the other is Crossing to Safety by Wallace Stegner. And I keep them around for no other reason because I know I'm going to have a conversation with somebody about books and I can give those two away.
Sure.
Yeah.
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 How generous of you.
Yeah.
How
Well,
benign.
like Jesus, I,
Just like Jesus. He
you
was
know,
handing out paperbacks all
I
over the
buy
place.
books for other people's sins.
Get him out of purgatory. Give him that Wallace Stegner book.
Yeah.
But only if they read it. If they just say, "Oh, thanks so much. I'm going to read that for sure," and then they
Yeah.
read this.
It's been, it's rare. I tend to, because of the conversation,
Mm,
people get interested, and so it's rare for people not to read the book. But
Hmm.
I went on a first date with somebody, and we met at a bookstore. And our premise was we would buy each other a book and say, I want you to read this, and then we read it. We learned something about each other. And the thing that we learned is we didn't want to date each other. So
that's good. Do you remember what book you got them and what book they got you?
probably The Orchard.
Yeah, and then do you remember
Yeah.
what book you
That's
got
like
him
a
and
say
Richard?
I can't remember.
Now, see, that's why you're not dating.
Yeah, this is a long time. Well, yeah,
Well, you're married, but other than that, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be cool? This would make a good story if I hate it when people say that to me, because I'm like, well, you write it then if it's so good. I'm not suggesting either of you write this. But no, it'd be funny if you got up to the cash and you both had bought each other the same book.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
wild.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's your meet cute, right?
That's a
For
meet cute.
romantic comedy. So,
And then it needs to get really dark.
mm,
And then
yeah.
there's no HEA,
Yeah.
happily
And they
ever
both got
after.
each other Game of Thrones. And
That's a book? I'm kidding.
That's funny.
and then show each other their journals and they say, "Oh, you look like a psycho killer." What are the chances two of them are in the same car on the same
Yeah.
day?
Oh, all right.
So,
Well,
Richard, I wanted to ask about, we've
Yeah.
got the grant experiment that Pat
Yes.
and I are working on. And so obviously you have some insights into grants as we've hashed. And just, you know, we're trying to figure it out. If you had to give somebody 5 tips for really understanding
Oh,
you know,
talk
how
about
to
putting on the spot.
yeah, yeah. This
Sure.
is the tough question. We're not, pen or ink
Uh,
here, or a pencil level. Uh,
uh,
curious, so here we are. Pat and I are doing this experiment, and we're having mixed success, but we're learning a lot. What would be the 5 things you would tell us that we need to keep in mind?
I'm trying to brainstorm 5. I have 2. I
Okay,
can.
two's enough. Two's enough. We'll work with 2.
Counter offer, 2 things.
um, the first thing, when I was at University of New Brunswick, I had a poetry professor who taught me many things, many things.
Mhm.
Arguably, the thing that he taught me that has stuck with me the most, or that I've benefited from the most, I should say, um, is that he was adamant that we should just apply to stuff.
Mm,
He was adamant in this with both grants and submitting our work to journals and magazines and competitions and blah blah blah.
Mhm.
Competitions might be there might be a caveat with that one that they often cost money. So he might kind of you might be partially enthused about that one. But for just submissions to magazines and especially grants, to just apply, that he said a lot of students think like, oh, well, I'm not a real writer, or I'm not good enough to, so I won't do that yet. And then they carry that, and then that mentality kind of sticks with them even after they graduate, and then it's just kind of the rest of their life. And I took what he said to heart, and it's really helped me. I used to be on the editorial board for the Fiddlehead,
mm.
and I've also had the fortune of serving as like a judge or a jury for competitions, or a jury member for grants. And it is all of those were such valuable experiences, because it showed me that even in my grant applications or submissions that were rejected, which is
Mhm.
the majority of them, it showed me not to get as bummed out as I used to get about those
Mm.
rejections. Like Pat, you mentioned a second ago that you had a manuscript that is, correct me if I'm wrong, that you said kind of made it up the rejection ladder of
Yeah,
Penguin.
yeah.
Yeah, just in my experience of being on the other side of the desk, that when something makes it up the rejection ladder, that's such a tremendous accomplishment.
Yeah.
Mm.
That at some point, at some rung in the ladder, it really just is. They just have to choose someone, and by extension, not choose the other 5 that were in the running, or whatever. And there, um, so I would urge all writers, and even artists, even though I know nothing about other art forms,
Mhm.
um, to apply to grants. That
Mm.
if you're eligible, like if you meet the requirements, and I think it, again, just in Canada, a lot of grants have reduced their application requirements, or like
Mhm.
publishing requirements or
Right.
resume requirements. If you meet the requirements, yes, just apply. And then even if you get rejected, know that if you have an idea, you still made it along quite deep into the process.
Good one.
Um,
Yeah.
which would perhaps bring me to my second point, is to have an idea that you're applying with. I found, again, this is just in my experience of being a jury member, the vast, vast, vast majority of grant applicants don't have an idea, but they're applying. They're applying with an emotion, and which is tough to buy into on a jury perspective. So that if you have an idea and you're specific in that idea, that the higher degree of specificity that you're able to have, I feel like the higher of a likelihood you'll
Right.
be successful. If you have an idea and you're specific with it, that even if you're rejected, I would still wager a lot of money that you made it quite far into the process, and then just at the end, it didn't work out for
Yeah.
reasons beyond your control. But those would be my biggest two for sure, just to apply and apply with an idea, and know that you took a crack at it. And then maybe if you're rejected, don't. I feel like I beat myself up a lot with rejections, as I know many writers do, but just to try and, that's a weakness of mine, that I let rejections get to me. That if you're able to move on from it and apply again, the better things will go.
Yeah. I just saw this thing, there's a woman on Substack, Danielle Corbett, who publishes, a newsletter called Grants for Creators once a month.
Yeah.
She'll send out like 100 different grant opportunities. It's for
Mm.
podcasters, artists, like not just writers. And she just did a little live thing on how she just got turned down for $100,000 grant. I mean, it was a big
Sure.
fish. She took a week off work to work on the application, and
Mm.
one of her lessons learned, very similar to that, is yeah, you have to be very specific, and the other part is when you get turned down, which is more likely than not, you can
Mhm.
see it as sort of just another step forward.
Sure.
It is a step forward because a lot of the time the grant applications force you to articulate things you hadn't really worked on. And that's been really helpful for me. Even that research grant I emailed you about
Mm.
initially, it gave me a whole new framework for this novel I'm starting. And I was like,
Mm.
holy shit, it's gonna be a lot better now.
Yeah. Yeah. Pat, that's a fantastic point. And I remember thinking the same thing in applying for grants in the past as well, that yeah, you can take it as absolutely as part of the process in and of itself. Like, for example, those applications that I mentioned a second ago about that they're applying with an emotion, not
Yeah.
Mm.
I not, not a specific project. I would also say that's true when I've worked with magazines and going through slush piles of submissions. That
Mm.
most short stories or poems aren't really about anything at all, but the writer kind of has this thought, and they're just kind of, letting it roll onto the page and then fucking shoving it onto someone else. Um, yeah, but the grant process, in many ways, if you're taking an earnest crack at it, forces you to articulate your ideas. That I think helps concretize the project. Exactly as you said.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so as you've gone along, you've applied for more grants. Do you kind of have a library of materials where you can, you know, there's this grant, I'm going to apply for it. I need to write, my summary. I need to do da. And you can go to your sort of library that you've created from all these past applications and be able to draw on that and develop, deeper ideas or even repurpose older material.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I certainly see where you're coming from, James. Kind of that. There's because not always, or okay, if okay, with Canada Council, for example, each time I apply, not always, but each time it's kind of with a different project. And then the only times that I repeat applications with the same project is when that grant was originally declined.
Mm.
Um, and then, but it's certainly a similar skeleton, like yeah, regardless of projects. However, just because a grant is successful doesn't necessarily mean that that template that I used, or like that method of articulation, doesn't necessarily mean that that was the best one or better than ones that have been declined.
Mm.
It is a lot. It is really subjective on the jury. For example, I think I can say this. That I am judging for a competition right now, and the story that I think by far was the best one, like not even close of a competition. That story, it hasn't been announced yet, and I'm not entirely, but it's not going to win.
Oh.
Yeah, the other judges weren't enthused, and so it would it would be a great error. Oh, a shattering error I think if that writer were then to take this rejection of this story as like, oh, I should change my story. Oh, my heart breaks at the thought.
Yeah.
Um, so just because a grant is declined, I definitely take it as feedback, as like keeping an open mind of things that I can change. And but I try not to let it be a reverberating judgment to the grant application and to the project itself. Just because a grant is declined doesn't. I try not to let me think like I should just turf this project
Right.
as a whole.
Yeah.
That being said, if I may, maybe I have one other thing to add to my list of 5 that I'm slowly building towards.
You're
Every
aggravating.
grant that I uh, write includes a sentence that was told to me by a professor, and I think it's a good sentence that I encourage everyone to include in their own. It's a sentence that starts, "There's an urgency to this project because," and then you just fill in whatever bullshit you want after.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and so every grant application I have includes this sentence, including the grants that have been declined, certainly. But I feel like it's a good sentence to include because you're not only arguing of why you deserve the grant, but why you must have the grant right now.
Yeah.
And I feel like that kind of elbows your other
Yeah.
competition out of
Yeah.
the way a little bit.
I think
Yeah.
that's brilliant.
Mine might, I might adapt that to be something like, you won't fucking believe this, but.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna die if you don't send me
Take
the
it,
money.
take it to the next level,
Yeah.
I really like that because, if you can think of the urgency for yourself, then you're less likely to I don't know if you suffer from this at all, Richard, but for me, I have to kick my own ass for the first 3 months of like I write longer stuff, but for the first 3
Sure.
months, I'm like, "Oh, this is gonna be hard. Do I really want to do this again?" Because, I work full time and have a
Sure.
life and stuff, and you're working, you have a life. So how do you would you say how do you focus yourself into writing a new story? Is it something you have to do, or is it a decision every time?
I would say that I was blessed in being born a Capricorn, and that really helps
not a
me.
lot of Capricorns saying that, so.
That really helps me overcome procrastination.
Yeah.
Um, I yeah, Pat, I wrestle with this a lot. There are times when I feel a lot of guilt about being a writer,
Mm.
in that it's just such a great fucking life. It's the best. Sometimes, like sometimes I'm walking the dog and I walk past people and think like they don't even know how much better my life is than theirs, and they're just going about their shitty little day. Um, and I I remember when I got my first grant, which was it was an Alberta Foundation grant, um, and it was so wonderful. Not just because of the money was great, but it's so affirming in a
Yeah.
way that's really. And I still feel that affirmation anytime I get a grant. Like I'm very thankful for the money, but then it's a real boost to the ego. I
Yeah.
feel as well. The first time I got a grant, my brother, who's just a year older than me, was working in a mine in northern BC.
Oh, wow.
And I was so enthused about the grant and so proud of the grant. Absolutely. I also felt a lot of guilt that I knew like part of his paycheck was being skimmed off to go into my shitty little poetry grant. Um, and that kind of stuck with me. So I often feel a lot of guilt about being a writer because of grants, and I feel like that guilt. Yeah, when I say this out loud, it just seems wildly unhealthy. But I feel like that guilt kind of compels me to write. That I
Yeah.
think like if I've stolen this money from someone, the least I can do is fucking write a few lines and try and
Do
make
the
it
Well,
work.
happen.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
suggest that there's something underneath too. It's not just the grants. There's something you said earlier when you're walking by a group of people. It sounds to me And for me, it's more of a survival thing. I don't know how I could survive this world if I didn't have a hobby, that
Mm.
forces me to think about things differently.
Mm.
Um, but I'll just spitball and you tell me if it's right or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
wrong. I feel like there's something about, being a writer that when you are forced to because you wanna write a story, you're forced to really observe, it makes
Mm.
you happier.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel it, really opens myself up to the world. Um, yeah, and listening and observing and yeah, 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 I agree, Pat, I
Mhm.
definitely agree.
Is that I'm just thinking because I know you have a son, it's also great for kids to have that kind of distance sometimes. I remember
Mm,
one of my daughters, was in trouble at school, which never happened. She's very law-abiding, and, she was in 4th grade or grade 4, as we say in Canada, and, she had to go sit outside the principal's office, and she knew it was
mm,
gonna happen. It was like the teacher said, "Tomorrow you have to go talk to the principal," and then she was like, I don't know how I'm gonna stand it." And I was like, "Well, just pretend you're writing a story about somebody who got sent to the principal's office, then you'll be
mm.
able to look at everybody going by and say, "Okay, what are they wearing? Are they making eye contact?" Like, it allows you to create this buffer between you and reality where you don't feel as responsible because for me anyway, because
Sure,
you're taking notes.
sure, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, any life event, that's tragic is a tragedy, but, it's also a great career move.
Yeah, there's some shit that happens where well,
Mm,
actually, Richard, you've got some very detailed, incredible stuff in your stories in Hello Horse. And, I bookmarked, but like I dog-eared the pages of stuff. There's about 20 pages dog-eared in this book. Oh, there's one where it's in Hello Horse, actually, where you say, uh, if you've never seen a wild horse before, you've got this all wrong. And you've got this fantastic description of a wild horse. They're shrunken, almost dwarfed. They've got this patchwork coat that's stitched across their bodies, matted manes, chipped hooves. They're as majestic as a stray dog, but they have that beauty that comes from never being close. I mean, it just it raises the hair on my arms because
oh,
I've
thanks, Pat.
never seen a wild horse, and yet I understand there's this kind of otherness about them that speaks to the character who's talking in this story, and I think that's what being a writer can do for you. It forces you out of yourself.
Mm.
Yeah, I, um, that's, first off, that's really nice of you to say, Pat. Um, yeah, I I remember when I kind of, I don't wanna say made the decision to be a writer, but maybe that's it. Um, yeah, and that how much it changed how I interact with the world,
Mm.
um, irrevocably in many ways, and I feel really fortunate for that, very fortunate for it. Uh, yeah, that it does, I don't know, it's kind of intoxicating in a way, I don't know, there just seems to be, like, all these, like, piles of cash just around in the world, and you just have to go up and and just grab as much as you can. Um, yeah, and it's just inexhaustible.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the way to say it. And, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, like it's like life serves it up, and you could take that any way you want, If
yeah,
that was a sentence coming from somebody who works in a mine, maybe life is serving
so
up shit that they're not interested in, but, and I'm not saying that's what happens when you work in a mine because 'cause I've never worked in
sure.
one, life serves it up, and if you're a writer, you get to, enjoy it in a way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm.
Cool.
First, thanks to Richard Kelly Kemick for his time and such a wonderful interview. We really enjoyed having him on the show and hope to have him back again when he's putting out his next book or has something new to announce or just feels like having a chat. We really, really enjoyed our time with him. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. We'd love to hear how we're doing, so please leave a comment, join our chat page, or send us an email at giftedunderachievers@substack.com. We're available on Spotify, iTunes, and anywhere else you like to get your podcasts. Thank you, and have an awesome, awesome day.